They wore their Net Promoter Score, NPS score, on their sleeve like a badge of honor. It was the most important thing to this company. They just thought it was the end all be all. And they always had this really, really high score. It had never dropped. They were very proud of it. And I was going to be the VP of customer success. So I was like, cool, I'm walking into something that's working. That's great. Well, I joined. And then a couple months later, they did the next NPS survey. And you know what happened to that score? Whoosh, it was cut in half. What? Cut in half. They had never had this low of a score. So if you want to see somebody, how they really react and how they really feel, take something they really deeply care about, rip it in half, and give them back half and see what they do. It wasn't pretty.
Welcome to 99 Humans. My name is Jeff Lakusta, curious coach and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, striving to understand how little things generate big impact.
And I'm Nadia, Carta, tech executive and lifestyle coach with a mission to transform lives and corporations by kindling hearts to generate a zeal for life.
Each week, we investigate stories about the human side of leadership to re-energize your spirit and help you become a stronger leader.
Because the reality is that leadership is messy, goofy, challenging, but always human.
Thanks for spending time with us today. Let's dive in.
Good morning, Nils.
Good morning, Nadia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Where are you today in the world?
Doing fantastic here in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh my goodness. You and I never spoke about this. I do love Arizona.
It's a beautiful place. A little hot at times. A lot of people have a lot of trouble with that, but we love it because the desert is an incredible place. It's just such a different environment.
My family and I, we traveled all Utah and Arizona in April, and we drove from the canyons down to the Dove Mountain.
Yeah.
The desert, we stayed there in a facility, in an hotel and resort. But I do love Sedona.
We went to Sedona not long ago, like maybe a month ago or so. Spent a weekend there. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful place.
It was one of the first time in my life where I felt so grounded and centered. And you know how often we're always looking for something? And when I was in Sedona, I had enough.
That's awesome. I mean, it's rare that you could go to a physical place and actually feel that, but it is a very spiritual, very healing. There's a lot of wonderful retreats there. Like it's an absolutely amazing place and world known. People travel from all over the world to go there, and it's only like 2.5 hours away or so from us here in Phoenix. So it's super close.
Yeah, I'm planning to do a girls' trip there soon. Tell me, what are you up to lately, Nils? I know you are all over the place and you do a lot of things. You have your own show.
Yes.
What's up with you lately?
So the biggest news is that I launched the Leadership MBA. And this is my program to empower managers, directors, and VPs with the leadership tools to confidently handle any situation. And in 12 short weeks, we tackle personal leadership, team leadership, communication leadership, performance metrics leadership, all in just an intensive. And then we support with a community and masterminds after the 12 weeks are over. So it's been an absolute blast getting that out into the market, having a really incredible group of 30 people in this cohort that just started. And I get to share my leadership tools with this group of 30. We go deep on everything, and my job is to empower them with these tools and help them show up in a different way, more productive, more effective, and just have a lot more fun because they have this incredible toolkit, which unfortunately doesn't happen all the time in our leadership roles.
Oh my God, well, it sounds incredible. I know how much work goes into creating those master classes and the content and curating it. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
As you know, this is a podcast about human leadership, so totally aligned with what you're doing. I'm wondering, though, how did you arrive to this place? Like, I know that you spent some time in a corporate environment as well. Would love to hear from you. What was your journey from whatever experiences you had as a leader, and how did you arrive at this point today?
Yeah, so the first 10 years of my professional career, Nadia, I had no idea where I fit. Like literally felt like one of those misfit toys in the Christmas Story movie. I had no clue. And I bounced around from job to job. I did everything from being a software engineer, which I was absolutely terrible at, to being a Xerox sales rep. I actually went door to door selling copiers, and I was equally as terrible at that. But there was one thing I was never willing to do, which kept the fire going and kept me pushing, which is I was never willing to settle for anything that just was a crappy job. I just could not stand the thought of doing something over and over every day that made no sense to me. And so I was always pushing and always trying to find, where do I fit? I had no clue. So at one point, I did get frustrated enough that I said, forget it with the corporate world, I'm out. And you know what I did? I went completely to the other end, literally other end of the spectrum, and I became an apprentice for an artist who made high-end custom furniture.
What?
Yes.
Okay, wait. Let me ask you some questions because okay, so what when you were in those corporate jobs where you said that you didn't fit,
Yeah.
what was happening? What was the environment that you were like, oh, I don't belong here?
Yeah, I just couldn't find, like you were just talking about there with Sedona, where you got into a place and you were like, this makes sense, this feels good. No job I ever had did that. I had little glimpses of things that were fun and entertaining. Like I did some consulting and I did some solutions engineering and I was on the sales engineer team for a while, but they were all short-lived. And they were all just these little one-off pieces of something that was interesting, but I just never felt like I could progress. And as a result, I didn't progress. I was at the individual contributor level for nearly 10 years. So I had no clue. I was just overly frustrated, I guess is probably how I would say it, saying one of these jobs is going to hit. I'm going to find a place where my skills and my value are well aligned with what everything works here. And I just couldn't.
So you flipped and you said, okay, let me go try something new. And you went to do furniture.
Yeah. So I had always had an interest in woodworking, right? And always had an interest in working with my hands, but had never, been serious about doing it outside of just more a hobby on that side. And it was at the point post the Xerox experience, which was one of the most intense, just physical and psychological experiences of my life. And I said, okay, I hit all of this, the entire spectrum of everything that I could possibly do inside an organization as of now, and nothing has worked. I need to go try something completely different. I just was so angry and so fed up. I was like, forget it. I'm going to go do something with my hands. My grandfather was a carpenter. I had always had an interest in that. And I was like, let's see what happens. My wife supported me 100%. So I got a job as an apprentice working for an artist, and he made high-end custom furniture. I'm talking like things that would end up in Architectural Digest magazine type stuff out of wood. Beautiful, beautiful pieces. And I wanted to learn desperately how to be an artisan because I had that deep passion for the craft, but I had no clue how to do most of it. So that was how that whole journey started.
So it's not that you went to manage the business. Were you working with wood?
No, I was the worker. I wanted to be the builder. That was it. And he and I, actually one of the coolest projects I partnered on, or I was part of with him, was we made a patio table for one of his clients out of teak. And if you ever worked with teak wood or know about it, it's very dense, it's very hard, it's wonderful. It's on boats, basically, is the easiest way to think about it. So it is very durable. So this client of his ordered a $10,000 patio table made from scratch out of raw teak wood. And that was what I spent a good 3 or so months working on. I was the one building all this piece. He gave me the instruction and told me, kind of what to do, but I was the one doing all the little details of the pieces, and like literally building something like that with my hands was an amazing experience.
I have to say, I believe it, because I have to say that when we have our hands involved and it's so intense, and it seems also physically tough because I guess you have to cut and do all the things. It must be refreshing for your brain. Help me understand how this all connects with your passion for leadership.
Yeah. This is really about the personal leadership side. And I had to go through these experiences in order to get to where I am today. So we fast forward past this experience. It turns out the artist, a wonderful guy. However, he wasn't very skilled in running a business. He was very skilled in being an artist. And so he couldn't really keep me on, and it lasted 3 or 4 months, and that was about all the work that he could support paying me. I mean, I was making all of like $15 an hour, so it wasn't a lot because I was an apprentice, right? And at this point, now I'm looking and saying, okay, I've had my experience in the art world, right? I've had my experience in the professional world. What the heck am I going to do? And I decided in a moment that, you know what, I had invested so much time and energy and effort into my skill set, into my education, into everything. Like, it's time for me. I'm ready to go back to the software world. I had always worked for startups before, so I wanted to go back. And I got a job with a startup in the area I was working in, and it was fine. And I was happy to be back in that world. But it was a slightly different perspective because I had been so far outside of what I had ever experienced before. And that was one of the key things, that taking those detours in your career, whatever it is, right, always pay huge dividends. And that's certainly what I found, that perspective changed after 3 or 4 months. Like, this wasn't a long period of time, but I looked at everything with a completely different lens and was far happier when I came back to the software world after that departure into the artist world.
Got it. And so when you were in the startup, what happened? Because if you came back with a different perspective, what that perspective was?
Yeah. So it was like, oh, like all these tools and these things that I had learned along the way, everything from my software engineer, quote unquote, time, where I picked up some technical skills. And then there were things from the Xerox time where I picked up some sales skills. And there were some things from my consulting and solutions engineering and solutions consulting where I picked up all these little skills. And it was when I came back that I realized that all of those little skills, which I picked up at random jobs along the way, were actually an incredible toolkit for me to be successful in this role. And I started working on a client-facing role and actually loved it. It was a lot of fun. It was a ton of fun. Now, in the middle of this, or a little while after going back to the software company, I had my first child. And that was another pivotal moment, as I know you know what that's like. And one Sunday morning, about 2 weeks after she was born, I was reading the paper, and I was sitting in our living room, and I happened to read this article, just random, completely random, picked it up, read this article about this woman who had taken time off to have children, then went back to work for one of the big consulting firms. And for whatever reason, that was the article, and that was the trigger, and that was the point where I looked around our living room, I looked at my daughter taking a little nap in the playpen thing, and I realized in that instant that I was going to have to do an awful lot more to provide for our family as it was, and the family that we wanted to have, because we wanted to have more kids, right? And that was the fire that I needed in order to go and decide to get an MBA. And that was a huge
Wow. Okay, wait, because you're going really fast here. So you were in a startup, you got your child, and
Yep.
that article sparked your zeal.
Yes, 100% sparked my zeal. Like, that was and I can honestly say that was one of the few, like, that was one of the most intense sparking of zeal, and probably one of the few that had ever happened, certainly in my professional career, for sure.
Well, can you speak more about that? Like, what was in this article that really got into your heart and kindled your spirit? What did you read that really hit you?
The funny thing is, it was a really generic article. Like, it was just about this woman who had taken time off and then went to grad school, and then got into a job with a consulting firm. And I was like, wait a second, And for whatever reason, it was just a trigger. You know, sometimes those messages are delivered to us in ways that we don't know how they're going to come. And this was one of those. And I remember the exact seat I was sitting at, the table, the chairs, the arrangement of the furniture, everything in that room, because it was that moment that I said, oh,
wow,
I get it. Okay. Now, prior to this, in the previous, almost 10 years, as I mentioned before, I didn't really invest a whole lot in myself. I didn't take myself very seriously. I didn't like school. I was never good at school. It was hard. And I had no intention of going back to school at any point in time. And at that moment, all that changed in an instant. I changed my mindset. I changed the frame of reference. I changed everything, but it happened for me, not necessarily to me. And that was the key for me to take away here.
Wow. So you decided to go back to school and get your MBA done. How long with a child that was a newborn? So already
Yep.
that is a huge undertaking. And then, I mean, were you studying and working at the same time?
Yes. So the program, I went specifically to this program. It was very close to where we lived at the time, which was great. And they had a part-time MBA, or it was built around people who were working already. So I worked full-time. I went to school in the evenings twice a week or so, 3 hours each, and then studied the rest of the time, all the time, right? And that was great. And it was about a 3-year track. If you were going to do that, that was how they designed the plan, and that was fine. So first child, she was a couple months old by the time I started my first year. Then I did 18 months, so halfway through the program in that fashion. But about 12 months in or so, or a little more than that, we had, I guess it was close to 18 months. We had our second child. So now I'm in grad school. I'm working at this startup. So already intense life situation going on. And I'm trying to balance work, school, and kids and home and everything. And I got to a point where only 2 of those things were going to last and work was going to have to go. So I actually left my job and went full-time for the remainder 8 months in order to finish the second half of the program so I could move on and get out of there, because I just needed, by the time we had 2 kids, it was time to get moving. And I had to roll. I was ready to go.
Well, it seems that, well, those are super tough decisions in a family environment to take. I remember when my husband did his own MBA, I was living in Paris, he was living in Milan, and we said, this is the perfect moment for you to do an MBA because I'm going to be out of the way and I'm not going to be bothering you. Whereas in your instance, with small children and your wife, and when you do such a big thing as an MBA, your head is completely
Yeah.
somewhere else. How did you manage all this with your life partner?
She is 100% the most supportive person I've ever known, and has always, we've always been in this together. And she's always said and recognized that, hey, what you are going to do, I'm there to support 100%. And I do the same for her as well. And at the time, we're firm believers that all things happen for a reason. Whatever that reason is, don't always know. And there's never a right time to do these things. Have children. There's never a right time. Move jobs. Try to be an artist making custom furniture. There's never a right time to do these. There's only a time to do it. And it was our time to do it. And so we did it. And, we navigated it. We eventually got through it, and we look back on it and it's like, okay, not a big deal. But it's a lot of times when I talk to people and I share this story and they're like, how did you get all that? And I was like, I didn't even have any money. Like it was literally a dance just to try to figure out how to get month to month to figure this out. But I had the long-term vision of, I'm going to get this MBA. I ended up focusing on my MBA on management and organizational behavior, which was just an amazing thing that finally clicked. That piece that I was talking about earlier, having no idea where I fit, I was like, this makes sense to me. This speaks to me. And that was key. So once I got that hook, then I knew everything else would take care of itself at some point. As long as I was focused on this area, I was going to be able to bring tremendous value to the company I work for, to the people I work for. And that was really the one of the biggest sparks of your zeal that I have ever had.
And so you did that with small children. So how long ago was this?
This was well over 10, 15 years ago. Yeah.
So your children are still teenagers now?
Yes. I have a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 11-year-old. Yep.
Oh, wow. So third in the end.
There was a third. He came a couple years later, but yes.
I mean, I really salute your resilience and your grit, and you having the North Star set in terms of where am I going, what am I going to do. who was supporting you in all this? Like, I understand with your wife, you had your agreements. How are you managing like your mental health? Because when you take such a big toll in terms of things
Yeah.
you're doing, which is all great, I totally agree with you that things happen for a reason and we get signs and everything. How were you taking care of yourself?
Yeah, there were some times where I didn't, to be completely honest. And it was when I was in that really intense period, going through the MBA. Well, I mean, everything from the Xerox thing on, switching careers, going through the MBA, getting back into tech. And during that time, I went from an individual contributor to a VP in 2.5 years because I now had the toolkit and I found the place where I fit. And it just was a rocket ship up and to the right
Okay,
because it
wait,
all came
I'm
together.
missing a point. Okay. So then, like, you still stayed in the tech company.
Yes, after my MBA, I went back to tech because I had to bring great leadership to these companies
Oh.
that from my experiences, nobody in the companies I worked for knew anything about leadership. And all of a sudden, I have this incredible toolkit. And I'm like, I got to bring this back to tech companies because there's nobody knows about it. And I just wanted to share what I had learned.
Wow, so full circle. So you did your MBA, with that you went back to the tech company, and that's where you found yourself thriving and really
Yeah.
growing your career. Okay, wow. And so here's one of my tough questions. When you were in this tech gig with a renovated spirit and all the things
Yeah.
you learned and all the magic and everything, has there been any situation that was incredibly challenging and so rough where you were able to apply all of the learnings from your MBA?
Yes. So let me tell you this story how I nearly fired myself in my first role as a VP, but it actually ended up being one of the best leadership experiences I
Okay, I
ever
want to hear that. Yes.
had. Okay. All right. So I was changed companies in order to take this VP role. First time I'm VP, I'm ecstatic. Just the world is on fire. I'm just rolling, right? Had a successful run, individual contributor, manager, director at this other company, and now VP. It's like, cool. Okay, so I interviewed with this company, and they told me all about how much their customers love them and their product. And this was back in 2014 time, so I'm going to use this metric, which has some different meanings today. They wore their Net Promoter Score, NPS score, on their sleeve like a badge of honor. It was the most important thing to this company. They just thought it was the end all be all. And they always had this really, really high score. It had never dropped. They were very proud of it. And I was going to be the VP of customer success. So
Oh,
I was
wow.
like, cool, I'm walking into something that's working. That's great. Well, I joined. And then a couple months later, they did the next NPS survey. And you know what happened to that score? Whoosh, it
No.
was cut in half.
What?
Cut in half. They had never had this low of a score. So if you want to see somebody, how they really react and how they really feel, take something they really deeply care about, rip it in half, and give them back half and see what they do. It wasn't pretty.
What
But,
was going on?
well, thankfully, they had this new VP of CS, and they were like, oh, this is your problem. Go figure this out. And I was like, okay. Like, I was brand new VP. I was just like excited to have some kind of problem to deal with. And so I partnered with one of the co-founders, and we went on this interview tour with our customers for 6 weeks or so. We interviewed them. We had notes, we had transcripts, we had recordings, we had data, surveys, mountains and mountains of data. At the end of the 6 weeks, he's like, the co-founder said, well, I got to do some other projects. You can take care of the analysis and the rest of this. And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. You know what I did, Nadia? Absolutely nothing.
Okay, what do you mean? You must.
I had no idea what to do. Like I was sitting there with a mountain of data, and I was like a deer in the headlights. I could not move. I had no clue what to
Oh
do.
my God. I guess AI was not as big back then.
Oh man, with AI, I would have been a whole different story. But I never would have learned this lesson, so I'm okay without having it there. So I had never been in this situation before. I had never been VP before. So you know what kind of feelings started creeping into my brain. Imposter syndrome started building and building and building. So about a week after we finished the interviews, the CEO was asking me, hey, what's the latest with the analysis and when are we going to see some recommendations? And I was like, yeah, it's coming. And then he'd ask me a week later and I was like, yeah, I'm working on it. I had this fire to put out with this customer. We got this big renewal over here. We got an upsell here. I was dancing like you would not believe, like dancing, just doing everything to avoid the question.
You're giving me anxiety by only telling me about it.
I know. And all this time, this imposter syndrome was building inside of me to this almost unsustainable level. And I couldn't, sleep was affected, eating was affected. I had this tension in my stomach and my chest all the time. And I nearly fired myself. I said, do you even have what's required to be in a VP seat? Do you even belong here?
This was all your self-talk to yourself. Oh my God.
100%. It was all me, right? So I'm at almost a breaking point. And thankfully, just again, one of these things that happen for us, one of the women on my team introduced me to this book one day called StengthsFiner 2.0. And I eagerly read it on the train home that night, and I was blown away. I was like, even the first chapter, just mind-blowing, total paradigm shift. And I was like, wait a second. So as soon as I got home, I said hi to my wife. I ran into the bedroom, and I opened up my computer, and I took the StengthsFiner assessment right there. And I got the results immediately. And the StengthsFiner assessment is a wonderful way to describe what it is you're naturally talented to do. And my number one strength, it said, the thing I am most talented to do in this world is that I see strengths in other people oftentimes before they see it in themselves. And bringing awareness of strengths to others gives me tremendous satisfaction. Absolutely 100% nail on the head. And it also said I take things that are average and make them exceptional. And I was like, yes. So all of a sudden, I had this language to describe what I could never describe before. If people ask me, like, what are you good at or what are you talented to do? I'd say, I like to work with people. Like it was some generic line, It's really hard to have that specific language. But when I read this report and I was blown away. Okay, so now I'm feeling like, all right, there's something big piece I'm missing here. I'm trying to figure out how this all plays into the project that I'm struggling with. I go back to the office the next day. And I talked to the woman on my team. I said, you never guess what? Like, my number one strength is maximizer. I told her all about it. She's like,
oh my God, I have the maximizer too.
No, it was almost. I'm thankfully not, but you'll see why. But she was like, that makes total sense. She could see it clearly in me. And I was like, okay, what's your number one strength? She said, it's something called strategic. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. What does that mean?
Yes, those are all ringing bells in me.
Right? And so she says, what it means is that I can cut through mountains of clutter and mountains of data and get to an answer before I even know how I got there.
She was the perfect person for you. I love it.
So in a moment of vulnerability, I said, you know what? You know that NPS project we have? She was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm honestly struggling with this analysis. I don't know where to go. And would you help me with this? And she I'll never forget. She looked up at me and eyes just got gigantic. And she said, that is my most ideal type of project to work on. And I was like, what? Are you serious? The thing I almost fired myself over because I couldn't do is something that she would want to do more than anything else. And it was so powerful. I was like, oh my gosh. So we ended up partnering together on this project. She drove the analysis and I supported her through my maximizer strength. And I helped her with the presentation and communication of the rest of the company. And she flexed her strategic strength in getting to the answers. And 9 months later, we delivered the highest net promoter score in the company's history. And
I love the story. There's so many things that I love about the story. Well, I'm still wondering what made the score dropped, but that's for another conversation.
That's another conversation. Yeah.
Look, leaders are often depicted as those people that must be strong and must be know everything and all of it. And they're humans. And this is what we talk about in this podcast, right? Like even when you have a VP title, that there's so much going on. We go through this internal drama and there's so much help needed. And I salute you for going that far in finding and then go to this person and talking about it. And I assume that those are things that you're teaching in your masterclass now.
Yes, I actually, yep, 100%. So this is in the personal leadership area. And I call this whole thing of how I use the StrengthsFiner assessment and what we do with the StrengthsFiner assessment, I call it claiming your strengths. Because that's what it was about for me. It was about, I had to claim and say, this is what I'm naturally talented to do. As long as I'm doing work that is aligned with this, or I am working in alignment with my strengths, I know I will be successful no matter what. The rest of it doesn't matter. You know, it's not in my top 5 strengths, anything related to data analysis. And that's okay. But I had to go through that experience in order to realize that, in order to come and be okay with that and feel good. And after this experience, then the tension released in me. The imposter syndrome went down because I was no longer comparing myself to some fictitious VP who could magically do an analysis and do everything perfectly. I am a maximizer. I'm going to find opportunities to support my team, and you flex on my maximizer, and I'm going to use their strengths in order to deliver what we need. And that is, the beauty and the part of the strengths-based leadership. And that's a big part of what we teach in the Leadership MBA.
I really love it. The best tip I had in my whole career came from one of my directors when I was in Paris. He said, remember to always find the person that is going to complement your weaknesses versus trying to transform them, because there's much more value and income into working towards your strengths and make that the anchor of your all greatness versus trying to. This is a very American way of leading, though, Nils, because I can tell you in a lot of more different cultures is all about really cracking your head about the things you're not good at and to make a 1% increment that is not going to go anywhere. Whereas if we were all clear on what are the things we're good at, and then we would surround ourselves and our teams with complementary strengths, it would be a lot better.
Well, it's fascinating. That was the best piece of advice you received, because that's exactly what I read in chapter 1 of the StrengthsFiner book. And they opened with, look, the traditional view of professional and personal development is find the things you're weak at and try to make yourself better at them. And frankly, we think that's a waste of time. Instead,
I agree.
Acknowledge where you don't have strengths, but focus on doing more of where you do have strengths, because we're all wired differently. But the hardest thing is always to articulate what it is you're naturally talented to do. And when you can do that through strengths, and whether you use a StrengthsFinder or some other assessment, whatever, StrengthsFinder is always going to be my favorite. But when you have the language and you shape your world and your work and your relationships and things, and you accept that other people have different dominant strengths and are not going to see the world in the same way, it opens up a world of possibilities for how to get things done.
I love that. So as we approach the end of this podcast, Nils, so I have 2 questions left for you. One is, what is out of all that you did in your life, including zigzagging, MBAs and VPs and all of it, what would be the one piece of advice that you would love to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, this was one that it wasn't until grad school where I learned this one. And that is the statement that you are the CEO of your career. Mm-hmm. And I was not for the first 10 years of my career, and the results showed. I didn't invest in myself. I didn't take my growth seriously. I pushed myself because I tried to find places, but I was always looking for other people to direct me. It wasn't until I took control and said, you know what? I'm going to be the one who makes the strategic calls. I'm going to decide how much money I invest in myself. That was the point at which everything went up and to the right, because no longer was I waiting for somebody else to make a decision about my life. It was in my hands. So become the CEO of your career. Right? And take control and recognize that if you want to invest in something, for example, like the Leadership MBA, it's your choice. It's not your organization's choice. Are they going to benefit from you going through it? Sure. Are you going to benefit 10x by going through it? Yes, guaranteed 100%. Right? So always think about it in terms of, how am I increasing my value, and what is the new skill set and new value that I'm bringing to this organization? Because if you bring more value to your organization, they're going to have to bring more value to you.
Oh, well, you know that this specific advice that you said is one that I love. And I go even further in saying that you got to be the CEO of your whole life eventually.
Yes.
no one is going to do it for us. So if people want to follow you and want to join your masterclass or anything, where they should go, Nils?
Yeah, absolutely. So check out leadershipmba.com. It has all the details on the program, and definitely connect with and follow me on LinkedIn, Nils Vinje. The link I'm sure will be in the show notes. And there's really only one or two Nilses out there, and only one that says Leadership MBA under his headline. So I'm pretty easy to find.
I love how special you are. We're going to add all of this in your
Thank
show
you.
notes. Such a pleasure hearing the story, and as a great reminder for me as a leader in a corporation as well, that it's always about looking at ourselves and really finding what we're good at and complementing with other talents. Because that woman that you included in your project, you made her day. So that was fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadia. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you and talking all things leadership and zeal.
And zeal. Have a wonderful day. Bye, Nils.
Take care. Bye.